if you're brand new and you're saying, where do I start? I would say Toastmasters, study books, study videos, interview other speakers, see what's working, what's not. Then go to Toastmasters, practice a few times before you reach out to anybody, then reach out to a group who's willing to bring you in for free, start finding some leads and get some video made, and do it quicker than most speakers who start and learn by doing.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry, but you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klink, and I'm really excited for today's show because we're going to be talking about a subject that is scary for many entrepreneurs, and that subject is public speaking. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how you can use speaking as a tool to build your online platform and also to make some money, which is what we're all here to do. So, we're going to give you some great tidbits here. And luckily, you're not going to be listening to me. I've got a great guest expert today. His name is Poirier. And Corey is a multiple-time TEDx speaker. He's sought after corporate and association speaker. He's also the host of the top-rated Conversations with Passion radio show, founder of the speaking program, and he's been featured in multiple television specials. He's a columnist for Entrepreneur and Forbes magazine. He's featured in and or on CBS, CTV, NBC, ABC, is a Forbes Coaches Council member, and that's just a handful of his credentials. And he's also interviewed over 4,000 of the world's top leaders. So he has some really impressive credentials and a lot of great experience to share with you. So welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, Corey.
Thank you, Bobby. I'm really, really excited to be here today.
So Corey, look, I'm excited to start talking about public speaking and the role that kind of adding a speaking practice can play in building an online platform. But before we get there, I want to ask you a couple of questions. I always like to ask my guests some questions about their personal habits and things like that. And as I understand it, you have a regular yoga practice. Is that right?
I have a regular yoga practice that is regular most of the time. So.
well, it's better than me. Look, I've tried yoga a few times. Actually, my brother-in-law is on his way to becoming a yoga teacher. So I'm kind of among the group that is his guinea pigs. And that's the first yoga I've ever done. But why is it that you enjoy yoga so much?
So I enjoy it. And this is why I say regular most of the times, is that right now actually is one of my little dips where I need to get back to it. You get into these, I launched a new book and then it took me in a totally different direction, but I always know that I need to get back to it. And so why it's so important to me is going back about 20 years ago, roughly, when I first discovered yoga, I was having balance problems. I was having anxiety problems. I was having these things that I went through the traditional medical system and was getting no solutions for. And somebody or somewhere, I don't know how yoga came up, but either somebody recommended it or I stumbled upon it. Maybe I Googled it. I don't even know. I don't remember now, but I went to a yoga class. And of course, the first class, it wasn't transformed overnight or anything. But for whatever reason, I felt calmer. I felt peace. And so I said, I got to try this again. And I tried it long enough to when I actually started feeling a difference. And to put a point on it, within, I think, about 2 months, I went from where I had balance problems. I went from somebody that was struggling to stand just normally with my eyes open. I would sway back and forth, to somebody then who could stand on one foot with my eyes closed. And wow. As you know, closing your eyes even on 2 feet, sometimes a lot of people will still sway back and forth. And so I guess the first reason for me with yoga is it changed my life. It actually was one of those few things I could say that when I practice it, I actually saw, whether we call it solutions or whether we call it results, I actually saw those. And that pulled me in. And then what kept me in was the benefits that I got from it. So feeling healthier, wanting to eat better because I felt healthier, better balance and coordination, stronger core, and on and on and on. So I used to work out. I worked out for years and years, and I got all of the benefits that I used to get from lifting weights, and then probably another, 10 benefits on top. And wow. So I guess the answer, Bobby, is that first of all, I enjoy it and it's peaceful and it calms your mind. It gives you that break you need. But secondly, there's so many health and personal benefits that it just seemed to me, once I figured it out and once I experienced it, I figured it was kind of I have to do it.
Well, so let me ask you, because you mentioned the benefits that aren't purely physical. And from the way you describe it, I'm gathering that you get benefits that you can kind of then translate into your career, or at least help you to be a better entrepreneur. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. So just like, exercise in general, it's been proven that people that exercise more often are more productive, they sleep better. And all those, of course, translate into, in my opinion, business results. And so yoga is much the same. You'll sleep better. You have a calmer mind. So, you'll be able to actually think through stuff. You'll be able to pause and think, what's the result of this? Or sit down and reflect and say, how was my day? So it just gives you those, I think it prepares you for, and it's almost like a muscle you're working, but it prepares you for becoming more grounded. And I feel you bring that in every way. Again, better sleep, better performance because you slept better productivity because your mind's clear. You'll get all kinds of benefits that I believe that translate very well into the business world.
Well, that's fantastic. It sounds like you're getting a lot of the benefits that I try to get out of meditation and regular meditation and just kind of getting up and walking and running. But it sounds like you're getting those same benefits from yoga, which is pretty fantastic. But with that, I want to move to why we're here to talk today. And that's your area of expertise. And your real area of expertise is that you kind of advise people and coach people about how to leverage speaking to grow their online brand and make money. And I guess what I'd like you to do is give me the sales pitch on why a busy entrepreneur who has a million things on their plate, has a million different ways that they can build their online platform. Why should they choose speaking as part of kind of their process?
Well, you actually set me up for one of them, which is they have a million things on their plate. So they want to be as efficient as possible with their time. And what's more efficient? I'm asking this as a hypothetical question or a throw it out question, but what's more efficient, reaching one person one by one, or reaching whatever the number is, but 500 people or 1,000 people in an audience or 50 people in an audience with your message? A simple mathematical comparison. First of all, you can reach more people in a more efficient way. But if we get way deeper than that, first of all, from a credibility point of view, I've been studying this for years. I was just mentioning releasing a book recently. That was book number 12. So I have a lot of experience launching books, and books are certainly a big credibility booster. They're probably the closest that I've discovered to speaking as a credibility booster, but I haven't discovered anything higher. So being a coach, being an online marketer, it comes with a lot of credibility, but here's the catch. A lot of people are doing it. So there's a point where all of a sudden you go, well, how do I choose between this guy and this girl and this girl and this guy? But as a speaker, because it's the number one fear in the world, a lot of those same people won't go there. So as a business owner or an entrepreneur, if you're willing to go where a lot of people won't go, if you have an expertise that you can share in front of people that makes them go, wow, that person knows what they're talking about, that's a pretty big boost to your business. So first of all, it's the credibility that comes with it and the message that you can get out to people in a more efficient way. But I would also add in that as a speaker, you have more influence, you can have more impact. It's a great way to introduce a lot of people to your business and for them to see your business in a way more prestigious light than they're going to see your business in if it's just a one-on-one conversation. So those are just some of the benefits and some of the reasons that I would say to an entrepreneur, this is something you need to look at.
So you would say that kind of public speaking in terms of establishing yourself as a thought leader is the top. It's better than a book. It's better than a podcast. It's better than a blog. It's better than any of those other tools because so few people are willing to do it. Is that kind of where you've come out on it?
To a large degree. It's like why, certain jobs that are high risk, dangerous jobs, they pay more because most people would never try them. So in much the same way. And so, yes, I would say that's a big part of it. I will say, and I kind of, I guess, preface it this way, but the book, having a book out, so there's two sides of it. Having a book out almost makes you an expert overnight. Having an international best-selling book takes that to a whole nother level. So I don't want to say that one, speaking or the book, one is bigger than the other. I think they're very comparable. But again, from my experience, the book is the closest that you'll come to speaking if I had to compare it to the various different ways you can build credibility almost instantly.
Well, since we're wasting our time on this podcast, maybe we should just go out and start publicly speaking instead of talking anymore, Corey.
So interesting. So when you say that, and funny because one of the things that I do a lot now, I get hired to actually host panels. So technically almost like a podcast that's live in front of audiences. But here's the thing, just because something is the most credible way, and if it is, I mean, that's my perception and perspective on it, but just because something's the most, let's say, the easier way to do it and maybe the most impactful way, that doesn't mean that all these other platforms and ways to do things aren't important and that you shouldn't maybe consider supplementing with them. So for instance, I just mentioned I have books out. I have a show, as you mentioned off the top. So if I thought speaking was the only option, then that's all I'd be doing. But I recognize that there's a whole bunch of different ways to get people into your quote unquote, your funnel. There's people that if I'm speaking, I could speak every day of the week, 2 times on Mondays, and I'm still not going to reach certain people no matter what I do. But I might be able to reach them writing an article for Entrepreneur or releasing a book. So I think and not only that, there's certain people that don't enjoy live talks and they might like reading a book more. So I think it's important to reach people in different ways if you're trying to build an online or even an offline brand, but speaking is definitely among the top.
Yeah. So when you mentioned, I mean, when you were talking about kind of the benefits of speaking, you did, I mean, you kind of hit it obviously at the elephant in the room, which is that we've all heard the studies that public speaking is people's biggest fear. For some reason, they fear that more than death, which I don't quite understand. But look, I kind of get it, right? I was a state champion debater in high school. I'm a trial lawyer by training, and yet I get butterflies when I have to get up and speak in front of people. So I understand it. So I guess what I would ask is, how do people get over that? For people who have never done that, how do you help people? What advice or tips do you have to kind of help them at least dip their toe in the water?
So here's an interesting, I mean, I share this often, so I guess you could say it's a fact, but a lot of people don't know it, especially when they might discover me for the first time at a talk. But where you're talking about those people where they're at right now, I was at least where they're at, maybe further behind. So very, very short version of how I got into speaking. It was totally a happy accident. I was terrified of the idea of being on a stage. I had a play in a festival. One of the actors invited me to try stand-up comedy. That sounds horrible, but I'll give it a go. I went to a workshop, figured I would never get on the stage. We did 2 weeks of the workshop. Then we ended up at a club where we thought we were going to be watching people entertain us. We found out 5 minutes to showtime, we were the entertainers. And I don't know why, what made me jump on the stage that night. I did. And I kept going back and bombing over and over again. But I realized that there were a lot of things that I liked about comedy that were in the speaking world. And once I discovered that, I sort of made the transition. But why I say this is because I bombed on the stage and I was covered in sweat. I have the videos of me covered in sweat trying to deliver stand-up. And so I was as bad as it gets. I mean, I didn't speak publicly until I was about 21. The first time I spoke publicly, I don't remember a word of what I said. And I asked people in the audience and they didn't know. They were like, I don't know, you were all over the place, but you were sure passionate about it. And so, I mean, and then I didn't speak again publicly for another 3 or 4 years. So I say this, Bobby, because it's important to note that I did start there. So I didn't start as somebody because I know people that were comfortable the first time they ever stepped on a stage. So what how I help people, there's different options, let's say. So on the very base level, if somebody hears one of my talks and says, okay, look, I have a speaking program. So, but let's say they say, I'm not there yet, or I just want to start at the very bottom. I'm not ready to invest in it. I just want to see if it's for me. Where would you go? Well, I'll send people to something like Toastmasters or joining a Rotary. And Toastmasters, for instance, is a public speaking nonprofit organization that helps people speak. They help people learn the process right from your first elevator or icebreaker talk that lasts 2 minutes. And you can even go as a guest and watch other people fumble until you're ready to do it. Most of them will let you do that. And so I would recommend, people start by going and watching other people and just go. And those rooms are often like 8 people or 6 people. So go where you're comfortable and start where you're ready. But if somebody said to me, beyond that, where would you go if you're either you've already done Toastmasters or you want to take this a little more seriously, then I would say, first of all, I'd say start watching videos. So start watching TEDx Talks, TED Talks, watch talks by Steve Jobs and Tony Robbins and some of the most notable speakers, and sit there with a piece of paper and a pen. I mean, this is what I did in the stand-up world, and make notes. What's working? What's not? Why is it working? Why is it not? And then figure out with your own personality how you can bring that into what you're doing. I mean, if you go to the next level and you say, I want to do a TED Talk, or I want to get paid to speak, or I want to speak in front of a big audience, then you might look at a program like mine or a Dale Carnegie program or something like that. So really it depends on where they're at. But I would say joining Toastmasters, there's not many speaking Bibles out there. So grabbing some of the best books around on speaking and watching some of the top talks and study those things and see why it's working and why it's not. That's where I would tell people to get started.
Well, so you mentioned books there. I love reading. I'm an analytical guy. So what are some of the top books that you would suggest to people on speaking?
So the ones that I go back to, I mean, I got them as the butterfly ears and highlighted and wrecked, basically. One is called Speak and Grow Rich. I was going to say the Napoleon Hill name. Yeah. But what's really interesting is they got permission from the Napoleon Hill Foundation to use that title. So Speak and Grow Rich by Lillian Dottie Walters. And that was a mother-daughter team who ran a speakers bureau. The mother did for 30 years. So she basically assimilates everything, and reveals everything she learned over 30 years of working with the top speakers into this book. So it's kind of like, in my opinion, it's the speaking Bible. Another one it's called Money Talks by Alan Weiss. And it's how to make $1 million as a professional speaker. And another one is by Carmine Gallo. And he's actually got 3 or 4 books that you could grab any of them, and they would be basically speaking workshops. One of them, though, probably the one that I dived into the most and I am a huge fan of, is The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. So those would be kind of like the 3 go-to books that I recommend to everybody.
Okay, so that's great advice, and listeners, we'll put links to those in the show notes so you'll be able to find those books easily. One thing I think that, Corey, that frightens a lot of people, aside from just the fear of speaking, is not knowing what's going to be expected. And so I think a lot of people will wonder, are there kind of general guidelines or standard formats for speeches that people would be expected to have or be expecting a speaker to be able to present?
So the answer is yes and yes. There's 2 sides to that. There's the side of, what makes for a great talk, and then what's the format traditionally of a talk that works. And so, again, I would say a really good starting point is go watch the TEDx talks that had 14 million views and see what's the format, what do they have in common? Because most of them will have those elements in common, even if the talk's completely different. But in terms of format, it's going to be something along the lines of a really strong opening, massively strong close, and then in the middle, ideally, say 3 points. Depends how long you have as a talk, of course. Let's say your 45-minute keynote down to an 18-minute TED Talk. Other than, say, a workshop or training session, anything that's a keynote or less, then you're probably going to want to have 3 points, 5 max, but I would say 3 points that you reveal. So as an example, let's say your talk's on customer service, then you will want to have 3 points. And whether those points can be built around stories. So maybe I've shared this idea before because it happened to me. I delivered a talk like this, but let's say you want to deliver a talk on customer service. And let's say you're delivering it in Florida and you want to customize it around Florida. Maybe you share 3 experiences you had at Disney, let's say, and they're stories, but they're points. So one could be about the systems that Disney has in place. Another one could be about a great experience you had and maybe a negative experience, as an example. So those would be, your 3 points that move the story forward or move your talk forward. And so we learn best in 3s. I mean, I learned that from the stand-up world, but that's pretty much a universal belief. That's why most movies and plays have a 3-act structure. So really, you should have a 3-act structure in your talk. So 3 points built off. Each one could be their own separate act and a story. You'll have, like I say, a strong opening and a strong close. And typically, so this is another little, maybe a hack, if you will. And this is from the Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, but it's something I'd been doing before I read it there, which is that your story or your talk should have a villain and a hero. So when you open up your talk, there should be something that the audience is basically rooting against and then something that they're rooting for. So you open it up with the problem or what they should root against. Maybe it's complacency or struggle with not having enough time. And then by the end, you give them the solution, which is the hero, for how they can take some of their time back. So that will be another thing, a hero and a villain. So interchanging stories and talks because I believe they're both the same. Right. But if your talks or your presentations have strong stories that pull people in and keep people in because they're relatable, they have humor, all those kind of great things. If you have a way to get your audience pulled in, like asking questions or saying something that they universally can agree on. And then if you have a strong opening and close and 3 points in the middle that move it forward, and then you have a hero and a villain, I think you're pretty well set up to have a pretty strong talk.
Well, it's funny when you're listing that out and explaining it. And once you hear that, I think an entrepreneur will immediately understand we apply those same types of rubrics all over the place. You do it in kind of in the perfect webinar structure that in a sales funnel is done the same way. You have an open, you have a close, you have the 3 secrets, you have all of that. So it's interesting to hear that there really is similarity between speaking and everything else that online entrepreneurs are used to doing as part of their everyday life. So that's great to hear. But let me ask you and dive deeper on general expectations for speeches. Would people generally be expected to have kind of a visual presentation, a slide deck or something else to go along with their speech? Or is that something that really depends from speaking opportunity to speaking opportunity?
So this is interesting because there's a 2-part answer. There's a yes and depends. And so the yes is, I'll say it this way. The yes part is that there's some talks and some places you go where that's what they're used to. They have 5 or 7 or 8 speakers on the bill and everybody else is bringing their PowerPoint and their laptop. So it's traditionally going to be almost expected. There's times when I've had people that say, you have to send us your presentation beforehand, your PowerPoint, in a time where I was originally not planning to use a PowerPoint. And they say, oh, well, what do you mean you don't have PowerPoint? Like you can tell they want it. But then the depends is at the same time, you just have to test it. But there's certainly audiences that don't want a PowerPoint. They feel that PowerPoint, because they've seen a lot of speakers that rely on the PowerPoint and they make the PowerPoint the crutch and it becomes the presentation instead of the speaker. Your PowerPoint should never replace you. And there's people that have had that happen. So they've actually said, you can't use PowerPoint here. So that's where it depends. There's some that are going to be firm that you can't. There's going to be some that are firm that they're blown away that you don't have one. And then there's some cases where you can decide either or. But the best way to decide that is if you are getting invited to do a talk or you're approaching somebody about doing a talk, is simply ask, is that, do you want me to have a PowerPoint? Are you okay if I don't? Do you not want me to have one? Just ask the question and that'll give you the answer. But I guess the answer is it really depends.
Well, and from your answer, I'm guessing that your advice to speakers and kind of budding new speakers would be, if you have a PowerPoint, make sure that you don't end up in death by PowerPoint, where you have everything on the PowerPoint, you're just kind of saying the exact same things on the slides, but instead maybe just use images and talk about images and things like that. Is that a more effective way to go about it?
Well, you hit the nail on the head because I thought you were going to ask me what I recommend, and then you gave the answer anyway. So you covered it off because how I changed that, which is important to note, I guess, is I started out using bullet points and basically, like you just said, covering the whole PowerPoint to the point where like it was going off the screen and I had to figure out a way to reduce it. And then all of a sudden now I have 700 words on a slide and all this kind of stuff. And so what would happen is, of course, they were so focused on trying to take notes that I didn't even exist. Not only that, the idea is, well, why don't I just send them the PowerPoint? Why do they need me now? And so what happened was I said, how can I improve this? Because I noticed on my evaluation forms, I kept getting comments about it. So what I did was I said, if you want to learn from the best, study the best. And so I went and looked and kept looking up surveys of who are the best speakers in the world. And various names came up over and over, like Tony Robbins and Bill Clinton. The one name that came up at the top all the time was Steve Jobs. So what I did was I went and basically started YouTubing Steve Jobs. And I tried to see what he was doing differently than me. And of course, there were some various things that he was doing. But the biggest one that I noticed that jumped right out at me was that he would have a picture of an iPod. He might even be holding the iPod in his hand. He might not even have it on the picture. But at the most, he would have a picture of the iPod on the slide. And that was the total slide. There was nothing else. Whereas I would have had written all the facts inside the iPod and had pictures inside and all this other stuff. And so I said, you know what? It's working. I could tell by watching. Wow, that's huge. I mean, and it looks so freeing. But I also knew that I was a storyteller because of my stand-up days. And I knew I could know the story well enough that an image would prompt me. So the image was good because it reminded me of the story. It kept me on track and all that. But just having that image, and it could be just a picture of a dog, if the story is about a dog, that's how I switched it up. And that's what the change, that's what the change looked like. And here's the cool part to this in terms of the difference in the response from clients is I jumped, at the time I tracked it, I jumped an easy 10% approval rating. So I can't remember the exact number at the time, but I remember I jumped 10%. So let's say I had 75% approval rating on my evaluation forms, the ones that I handed out. If I had 75 then, it jumped to over 85% overnight, like instantly from that difference. And also the complaints about me having too many bullet points and text and all that in the slides disappeared. So to answer your question, that was a long answer because you had already provided the answer. But yeah, I'm a really big believer. If you're going to use PowerPoint, you need to find a way to make it pop and make sure that it's not the presentation.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I have to tell a story. I wasn't actually there, but I was brought in after the fact, and I saw a transcript from a court hearing where a lawyer, because lawyers are horrible about PowerPoint, and a lawyer, I think they had a 550 slide PowerPoint deck, and I mean, each one was just chock full of points. I was like, oh my God, I'm glad I was not there, because that would have been a horrible, horrible presentation to listen through.
Well, and here's the thing: if call a spade, if I'm being fair, there's somebody like, say, a Seth Godin who could have, and he does have, like slide after slide after slide. I mean, somebody told me they brought him in, and I think he had 67 slides or something like that.
Right.
But the way he approaches it and how he approaches it, he makes it unique. Like it actually becomes part of who he is. But there's only one Seth Godin, right? So I mean, most people wouldn't be able to pull that off. So I can't say that you can't make that work. Now, in fairness, of course, he still has visuals. He doesn't have bullet points on 67 slides. He has visuals, and they're all quick slides, and he goes through them quickly. But the point is, he still has a lot of slides. He makes it work. But I say, again, if he makes it work, but he's the anomaly. Don't try to copy what few people could do. Copy the thing that most people will be able to do with ease, especially if you're brand new.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you that, because we're talking about brand new people for the most part here. What should someone who wants to become a speaker, what steps should they take before they even think about reaching out to someone to land a gig? What should they do kind of as the prep work in advance?
So, there's two, because I'm going to say there's even a step of reaching out before reaching out, and I'll explain what I mean. But so first of all, I would say it depends where they're at. So like we say, if they're brand new, let's say they've never delivered a talk, they've never practiced speaking. I mean, let's say, for lack of a better term, as green can get. So brand new, first minute thinking about it ever. I would say is what you need to know is what works and what doesn't. And obviously I'm not big on hacks and efficiency, so why not figure that out as easy as possible? So I would go back to some of the things we said earlier, like for instance, you Google and YouTube some of the best speakers and watch and take notes and see what's working, what's not. I would say if you're brand new and green, maybe bring 3 or 4 people over and get them to watch the videos with you, and you guys can work through together what's working, what's not. And also it'll help you see what's working for 4 or 5 people rather than just yourself. I would also say grab 1 or all 3 of those books I mentioned and dive into those and take notes and all that kind of stuff. I would say reach out to other speakers and ask them and see if someone will give you their time, gain an audience with them and ask them questions about what's working for them, what doesn't work, mistakes they made that they would avoid. So I would really get to the idea of, studying the speaking trade and field before you're actually jumping on stage. Then I would say, I mentioned Toastmasters, I would say get into a Toastmasters or something where you can practice before you're actually on and before you're in front of an audience. Then when I said I would say there's a pre-approach stage, I would even go one step further. Before you approach somebody who is going to maybe pay you to come in and speak, or you're going to offer a product that you want people to learn about, I would say go in and invite or reach out to some chambers or rotaries, and even that Toastmasters club that you've joined, or maybe another Toastmasters club in town, and see if you can get on some stages where you're speaking for free. And sort of the world isn't depending on, whether if you fail this talk, it's not going to be the end of the world, because they're going to understand, and they're a member and they've come for free and all that kind of stuff. But here's the cool thing: if you knock it out of the park, I talk about an evaluation form, and we have a unique evaluation form that it took me years to craft. And on that form, there's a question like, do you know of others who could benefit from this talk? And so I recommend get in front of an audience for free when you're brand new, hand out the evaluation forms. Maybe you get 100 people in the audience and say 80 fill it out. Now you have some leads, but also you have a note there on that form that says, can we use your comments as a testimonial? And all of a sudden now you have testimonials early on. I would say take a video camera and videotape it. Because if you knock it out of the park, all of a sudden now you have testimonials, leads, and video from your very first talk ever. So that's kind of what I would say if you're brand new. That's sort of, and I've skipped a few steps, but that's if you're brand new and you're saying, where do I start? I would say Toastmasters, study books, study videos, and then interview other speakers, see what's working, what's not. Then go to Toastmasters, practice a few times before you reach out to anybody, then reach out to a group who's willing to bring you in for free, get your evaluation form in there, start finding some leads and get some video made, and that'll get you ahead and do it quicker than most speakers who start and learn by doing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And let me ask you a question. I assume when you're starting out, you should essentially have one signature talk that you can give in kind of various lengths depending on what's required, but it should be pretty repetitive in the sense that you're going to be giving the same talk over and over again. Is that how you generally advise people?
So this is another interesting area. So you said a key word there, when you're starting out. So the answer I would give is yes, when you're starting out. Here's where it gets a little more tricky is I get people all the time asking me, should I niche and have that one signature talk for 8 years, or whatever that timeline is until a new one develops, or I write a new book and then have a second signature talk and then start from that one. So this is a challenging answer because I can give you example after example of people that have done that, like a Seth Godin, who I mentioned earlier, who has books that are all of a similar type vein. His talks would all, he'd deliver a talk for 2 years when he has a new book out, maybe The Purple Cow, and then he switches to a different one when a new book comes out. Then I can go to the other end extreme, and we got Tony Robbins, who has different talks depending on the audience, and who's definitely more of a generalist speaker and not as much of a niche. The late Zig Ziglar was definitely a generalist speaker, spoke on success and sales and leadership. And so he might have 4 or 5 signature talks. Whereas again, you go back to like a Gary Vee or a Seth, they might have one talk for the next 3 or 4 years or however long. So that's a tough one once you get going, because I don't like to limit people and say you should niche. I will say this, we hear and we pronounce it niches or niches, and they say the riches are in the niches.
Yep.
And so what I will say is this, it's going to be easier for you to get hired over another speaker if you're a specialist in a niche or niche area. You're going to get more opportunities if you're a generalist. But the question, and by the way, as a niche or niche, you're going to be able to charge more because you're going to be one of the only ones they can bring in for that talk. But again, you're not going to be applicable to various different talks because you're not generalized enough. So I think you have to decide what's important to you, what your personality type is like. Some people love giving the same talk. Some people, that for them, they need to mix it up. So I know that's a long and a different answer. It's not a very succinct answer in one way or the other. But if you're brand new, I would say, yeah, one signature talk. You cannot dilute it. You'll get too bombarded and confused, and you'll never be able to perfect that first one. But once you perfected it and once you've got some ground under you, I think you then have to decide, am I going to stay niched, or am I going to expand?
By the way, I'm glad that you're just like me and I have trouble deciding whether to say niched or niched. I never know. I'm glad that's not just me. But look, I think that's great advice. And that's what I expected you to say. Early on, you have to kind of stick to one. And then once you get off the ground, you can decide whether to expand out. But since you mentioned kind of once you start to get some success or master it, that kind of leads me to my next series of questions, which is, look, the reason why an entrepreneur is doing this is to make money, whether it's from speaking fees or because they're able to sell a product. And so what are kind of a reasonable expectations for someone about how much money you can make from your speaking gigs, let's say a year after you start really trying to add it into your business?
So this is one that it's an interesting question, because speaking is one of those rare things where when people say, what's a range? So I'm going to give you a definitive answer, but I'm also going to preface it by saying that people say, well, what's a range? And there's speakers right now that are paying $2,000. And I said paying to get on a stage in front of an audience. And there's speakers right now that are getting paid, and I'm not making this number up, $1 million plus to deliver a 45-minute keynote.
Right.
So when I say that, you can see why it's hard to say this is your range. Somebody like a Gary Vaynerchuk, probably his first year of speaking, he didn't start speaking until I think he already had a book out. He had taken his Wine Library TV to 80,000 viewers a day. He probably started, his first talk was probably $10,000. Mm-hmm. So within less than a year. Then there's people, I'll not name names, but I know a speaker who's a great speaker who has done 2 TEDx talks, who's spoken at Apple and Citrix and various other places, and Microsoft as well. And he said to me, sitting down one day about 2 years ago, Corey, I'd love to know how you're getting paid thousands per talk. I've been speaking for 5 years, and I only had one talk that was over $1,000, and it got canceled because the guy putting it on canceled the event. So this is a person that was speaking for over 5 years. I figured he was at 5,000 plus per talk, and he still hadn't got paid yet. So there's such a big range, but in terms of, let's say, what if you're an entrepreneur and you're saying what's possible? So I think that's really the question: what's possible, not what's the norm or what's expected, but what's possible is, I would say, a normal fee for, let's say, your first year in, and this depends on whether you're using speaking, and you have to almost decide this early on too. Are you using speaking to leverage it to sell products or grow your business and build your brand? Are you using it to get paid a speaking fee? Are you using it to get people into your back end product? There's a whole bunch of different approaches there. Are you using it to get a book out? It could be, you're using it to get media. There's a lot of different ways you could use it. What I will say is, for me, I actually tend to approach it that why not use it for all of those things? And so I actually have pretty much since the first year, early in the first year, I got paid for my early gigs. And I actually, even when I was getting paid next to nothing, I made sure I got paid, because in my own head, I had to believe I'm going in this direction. I want to get paid as a speaker. But I'm in a program right now. Yes, I still take other people's programs with a speaker, and he totally, and blows my mind, he's a top tier speaker, but his total focus is you can't make money as a speaker unless you're selling products from the stage, which is totally not true. I mean, I'm getting paid thousands of dollars per talk, every talk. And so my answer would be, what's realistic and what's possible? I would say that if you deliver, and if you dive in and learn this business really well, and you take a lot of the shortcuts that are possible, I say $2,000 per talk is realistic. In terms of, if we're talking, what could you be getting paid as a speaker? And that's if you're delivering. You have to deliver at that level to get into there. Most speakers bureaus won't look at you until you're at $2,000 a talk. But I think that's doable within your first year. And the other side is, if you're not doing it to get paid as a speaker and you're doing it to grow your business, well, the good news is anything's possible then, because you could go and do that first talk for that chamber I mentioned for free. And you could have somebody comes up afterwards and said, do you do any coaching? And let's say that's your business model. Then all of a sudden you have a client instantly. You get to decide how much that client's worth at that point. Or, you could be running a company where you're looking for investors, and you could deliver a talk to 100 people and have one investor come that day. So when you talk on that side, I would say the sky's the limit, or anything's possible. It could be nothing, or it could be paid really well. But if we talk strictly fees, $2,000, $1,000 to $2,000 is very, very realistic in the first year. If I go back in my memory banks, because I'm now 15 plus years in, I was in between the two of those in my first year.
Great. Well, so Corey, this has been great. I have one last question that I kind of like to ask all my guests, and then after that, I'm going to let you go. And that question is this: look, I like to think in action steps and in concrete things I can do. So what is something that my listeners could do, kind of, if they put 5 minutes a day in, or something they could get done by the end of the week to start to build their speaking practice as part of their business? What's the piece of advice you would give to start?
So the truth is, it doesn't start until you have a talk. It doesn't start until you have a message. And so what I would say is, first of all, you need to figure out if yours is going to be a signature story, or if it's going to be a talk like I mentioned, maybe customer service, and you have 3 points. A signature story would be, somebody who has, let's say, a friend of mine, Dave Carroll, United Airlines broke his guitar. So He wrote a song about it, and that's become his signature story about customer service around what United Air did to him. So his whole story is about that, and that's his whole talk. So you have to decide that first. But after that, I would say the first step you could take within a week is start building your presentation. And whether that's starting with pen and paper, and you start writing down, what do I want my theme to be? And what do I want my key stories or points to be that move the story forward? We gave you a framework earlier for doing that. I would say start working on a presentation, because nothing starts until you have something to talk about. And you need to get that fleshed out. And I think that's the most important thing. So if you're going to get on a stage, I would say start working on a presentation. If you haven't even got as far as knowing that you're going to do it, I would say reach out, Google right now Toastmasters or Rotary or one of those clubs where you can get in front of an audience, but go as a guest and watch other people speak before you ever try to conquer that, because that'll give you the confidence. If you can see other people speaking and conquering the fear, that'll give you the confidence if you see that they were nervous when they started and they still did it.
Well, Corey, that's great advice, and I appreciate it. And thank you for giving kind of multiple levels, so people who are ready to go and people who are thinking about it. So I think that's perfect. I'm going to let you go. Before I do, where can my listeners get in touch with you, or if they want to follow you or learn more about your services, where can they do that?
So I guess if somebody's listening to this, Bobby, and they're saying, much like anything else, I like the idea of speaking and I like the idea of diving in and some of the things you mentioned, but I want more guidance than that, or I want more assistance, or they want to dive deeper, then of course we do have a speaking program that people can learn more about and check out. Really easy, thespeakingprogram.com. So again, thespeakingprogram.com. And if you go there and sign up, you'll actually get access to some free training. So even if you never decide to jump further, that's a really good take action and starting point, is to at least go there and watch some free videos and see if you can take something from that you can incorporate in. So that would be one direction. And the other direction I would say is you can actually find me almost anywhere under That Speaker Guy. So whether that's Twitter or Facebook or what have you. But if you Google That Speaker Guy and then my name, you'll be able to find me on Google, and you can dive in, and I think you'll find interviews and stuff that you can learn about the speaking industry from me that way. And if you do, make sure you reach out and say hello to me as well.
Thanks, Corey. That's perfect. And we will have links to all of that in the show notes for listeners to grab, so you don't have to worry about writing it down. But that's it for now, Corey. I'm going to let you go. But listeners, please stay tuned for the quick legal lesson after the break.
And now for today's legal lesson.
Yay! Wow, that was an action-packed interview with Corey. I am excited. I really do want to start creating a speaking career for myself. I haven't started that yet, and maybe I'm a little bit different than other people because I've been engaged in public speaking since I was a sophomore in high school, first in debate and other avenues. So it's something that comes naturally to me. But it had some really interesting advice from Corey. I think it's a great way to really build your expertise, and so I'm going to be looking into it. I hope you will too. Now, I wanted to take this episode and an opportunity here to give a legal lesson that's not strictly about speaking or speaking issues, but it relates to an issue that Corey talked about. Now, remember when we were talking about a visual presentation to go with your speech, and we talked about how you don't want death by PowerPoint. You don't want a bunch of bullet points and all those things. Instead, most often, you're going to want just images. And so what I wanted to talk about is how do you get the images to use for, a presentation, whether it's for speaking or for your website or social media or anywhere else. How do you get them and get images that you can legally use? Now, I want to step back and start with the problem, and then I'll give you the solution. Now, the problem is that images are protected by copyright law. Copyright law it's originally given to the creator of an image, but it could be transferred to someone else. But it gives the person who has the copyright in an image the exclusive right to make copies and distribute and to show for public use any image. Now, that means that if you can't just go grab images from anywhere and start using them. Because if you do that, you would be engaged in copyright infringement. And that's not something you want. It's an issue that, not in the context of speaking, but it's an issue that quite a few online entrepreneurs have faced. I can't tell you how many podcasts I've appeared on as a guest, and I always hear the horror story from the guest about how they got a letter from someone because they had used an image on their website without permission. So this is a big issue that comes up because a lot of people do what I call the right-click save as problem. They go to Google Images, they search for something, they see an image they like, they right-click, save as, and then just use it. And you can't do that because if you do that, you are engaged in copyright infringement. Instead, you have to get images that you can legally use. Now, there's some different ways to do that, and I want to talk about how you do it in this context. Now, I'm not going to talk about the logistics of, what's the best site to use, et cetera. That's not my goal here. And more also, I'm not going to tell you whether you need to get free images or can pay for them. There's all kinds of sites out there where you can get images for free. Then you have all the way up to the really expensive paid sites like Getty Images, where you could pay potentially thousands of dollars for a single image. You've got to make that decision from a business perspective yourself. What I want to talk about, and the lesson I'm going to give you is, whatever route you go, what do you need to look for in the license terms? Now, license is what lawyers like myself call an agreement that gives you the rights to use a certain piece of intellectual property, like an image protected by copyright law. And the license is what sets what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So when you get an image, it's going to come with a license when you go to one of these sites, and you have to use it consistent with that license. So I like to stress to people that there are 3 key elements that you must have in any license you get for an image. But it would also quite honestly apply if you got it music or any other kind of media. This is what you want in any kind of copyright license you get. So number 1, you want it to be royalty free. Number 2, you want commercial use to be allowed. And number 3, you want no attribution to be required. So now I'm going to walk through what each one of those means. First, I said you want the license to be royalty free. Now, that doesn't mean the image is free. It could mean that you could pay for it or you could get it for nothing. It doesn't matter. What royalty free means, however, is that there's not going to be some charge later because you get a lot of use, a lot of views, etc. So the contrast to royalty free. So you have royalty free, which is good. The other kind is something where you have various tiers. So if you go on to places like, I think Shutterstock, where you have to pay, has this, but Getty definitely does. There's one fee if you're only going to get, say, and I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but say 25,000 views or 20,000 views or 1,000 views. I don't know exactly what it is. And there's a higher fee if you get more views, etc. Now, why do you not want that? Well, you don't want to be in the place where you get an image and let's say you get it for a blog post or you get it for something else and it goes viral and then all of a sudden you owe more money for the image. You don't want to be there. Royalty free means whatever you pay up front, whether it's $0, $1, $10, $50, whatever you pay up front, that's it. You're never going to have to pay another dime. And so that's an important attribute to a license, just so that you don't have to worry about it in the future. Now, the second attribute you want is that commercial use is allowed. You need this because you're going to use these images for your business and for promoting your business and for advertising and for marketing and for all of these other things. And so if the license does not allow for commercial use and you use the image for commercial use, so in a paid speaking engagement or something like that, then you are exceeding the license. You're engaged in copyright infringement. So again, you have to make sure that it's allowed for commercial use. Quite honestly, that's not normally an issue with images from a lot of the stock image sites because that's an expectation that you're going to use it for commercial use. Where you have to look out for this is in a related context of certain apps that will put, for example, quotes on top of some artwork or something like that and post it on social media for you. Some of those apps specifically say they're only for personal use, not commercial use. So you have to be careful that you're not exceeding the license in that context. Then the third requirement is that no attribution is required. And what this has to do with is whether you have to give credit to the person who took the photograph or created the image if it's something more than a photograph. We've all seen those. Sometimes you'll have an image and then, on the bottom it'll say courtesy of. Well, if the license does not say no attribution required, then you need to do that every single time you use the image. And again, look, there are lots of legitimate reasons why a photographer, for example, might want attribution for their images. Maybe they put out, say, 10% of their images for free, and they want people to attribute it to them so people will come back to them, find them, and maybe buy from them in the future, hire them, etc. I get that. That makes sense. But there is also some people out there who use this requirement, the attribution requirement, in kind of an underhanded way to actually get you and other entrepreneurs to engage in copyright infringement. See, they put their images out on various places and say, you can use it for free, it's fine for commercial use, but they require attribution. And they're doing it because they know you're probably not going to do it. You're not going to give attribution. They're going to find out about it because there are all of these computer programs that can search the internet and find all these things. And then guess what? They're going to send you a letter and they're going to demand that you pay them a license fee. In spite of the fact they're giving it away for free, because you didn't give attribution, they're going to demand a payment. So you need to be careful on that. Now, separately, it just comes down to, quite honestly, do you want to have to keep track of, okay, this image, I have to give attribution, and make sure you do it every time? You just don't want to walk down that road. So that's why I give that advice. So again, those are the three big elements. You want royalty free, you want it to be okay for commercial use, and you want no attribution required. If you have those in the license, you're in good shape and you don't have to worry about it. So that's kind of it for the lesson, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. There's the standard outro you're going to hear about the mistakes cheat sheet, but I also have what I call the ultimate stock image guide. It's a guide that has these three elements, talks about them a little bit more, but it also has a list of a dozen free image websites where I've looked at the license terms. It meets these requirements, so you can go there and know you're in good shape. You can get your hands on that stock image guide at safeguard.youronlinegenius.com/stock image download. Again, that's safeguard.youronlinegenius.com/stock image download. You go there, you can get your hands on the stock image guide, and you'll have those 12 sites. You'll be able to go there and know that you're in good shape. So that's it for this week. We have another great episode coming up next week. It's already recorded the lesson right after I'm done with this one. So it's going to be a great time, great thing for you. So I hope you will tune in next week and make sure that you get the information that you need. But until next time, this is Bobby Klink, and I am signing off.
Thanks for listening. And remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.